Snow swirled through the air in frantic, twisting spirals, stinging my cheeks as I stood on the back porch. The muffled hum of laughter and clinking glasses from inside barely reached me over the wind. He was there, just a few feet away, his breath visible in the cold, his eyes fixed on mine. Neither of us moved, but the space between us seemed alive, electric. The porch light flickered, briefly casting us in darkness. The moment was pulling us closer, inch by inch, like the inevitability of an incoming tide. Then, behind me, the sliding door rattled open and a voice called my name sharply. I turned. The spell shattered. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: would you be able to forgive a loved one's betrayal? Thanksgiving that year was supposed to be simple. My husband had insisted we drive up to the lake house early, to beat the storm, as he put it. We arrived to a half-buried driveway, tire tracks vanishing under new snow, and the smell of wood smoke in the air. The house was already buzzing, doors opening and slamming, coats being thrown over chairs, someone shouting from the kitchen about the turkey. I stepped inside, instantly swallowed by the warmth and chaos. The scent of cinnamon rolls and roasted vegetables mingled in the air. Relatives I hadn't seen in years leaned in for quick hugs, pressing chilled cheeks to mine. My husband disappeared toward the living room, already deep in conversation with his brother. I drifted toward the kitchen to help. Though no one seemed to need me, my sister-in-law had everything under military control. It was on my way back to the hallway that I first saw him. Taller than I remembered, broader in the shoulders, wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled just enough to show forearms dusted with flour. He was at the counter, helping knead dough for dinner rolls. For a second, I didn't place him. It had been years since we'd last spoken beyond brief pleasantries. Then he looked up. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but there was something else there too, something I couldn't name. The day unfolded in fragments, kids running down the hallway with Nerf guns, someone spilling cranberry sauce, the old Labrador weaving through legs. I kept catching sight of him in the periphery, helping stack firewood outside, leaning against the kitchen doorway with a beer in hand, listening to my cousin's rambling story. Each time, I told myself it was coincidence. Dinner was a noisy affair. The table stretched nearly wall to wall, leaves added to fit the growing family. My husband sat at the far end, deep in conversation. I was wedged between two cousins, smiling politely, passing plates. Across the table, he sat back in his chair, one arm draped loosely over the backrest, gaze occasionally flicking toward me. Once, during a lull in conversation, he said, "That color suits you." I froze for a beat, unsure if anyone else heard. The chatter rose again, covering the moment. After the meal, most of the family drifted toward the living room for pie and coffee. I slipped outside with my coat, craving air. The lake was a frozen sheet, glinting under the early darkness. My boots crunched in the snow as I walked the short path to the dock. The quiet was almost absolute, save for the occasional groan of ice shifting beneath the surface. I didn't hear him approach until he was beside me. "Colder than it looks," he said, his voice low. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the horizon. We stood like that for a while, no small talk, no forced smiles, just the wind and the dark water beyond the ice. Then, too soon, voices called us back. By nightfall, the house had settled into pockets of activity, some watching football, others playing cards. I found myself alone by the fire, the glow of the flames washing over the room. The door creaked, and he stepped in quietly. No one else seemed to notice. He didn't speak, just stood for a moment, watching the fire as if he'd been coming here for years. Then, with a small nod, he left. I should have let the day end there. But when I came down the next morning, still half asleep, I saw something on the dining table, my sweater. The one I'd worn outside by the lake. It was folded neatly, but the faint scent clinging to it wasn't mine. And just like that, I knew he'd been closer than I'd realized. The house was still dim when I stepped into the hallway, the sun just beginning to cast pale light across the snow-covered trees outside. A kettle hissed quietly on the stove, and someone had left a coffee mug half-filled near the sink. The sweater I'd found folded last night was clutched in my arms, though I had no memory of bringing it upstairs. Its faint trace of cologne still clung to the fabric, his cologne. The voices began to rise from the guest rooms. Floorboards creaked overhead. Laughter rang out from the basement where the teens had camped out on air mattresses. The house was coming alive again, louder, brighter, and harder to think clearly in. Breakfast was a storm of plates and cereal boxes, people weaving around each other like a school of fish. I moved on autopilot, pouring juice, refilling coffee, answering questions I barely heard. My husband was somewhere outside, helping shovel snow with his brother. I caught a glimpse of him through the frosted kitchen window. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him again. At the dining room doorway, leaning one shoulder casually against the frame, quietly observing. His gaze locked on mine for a second too long. I turned away and opened the fridge, heart slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. Mid-morning, the family headed to church. It was tradition, even for those of us who hadn't stepped inside one since last Thanksgiving. I rode in the back of the SUV with two nieces and a box of canned goods balanced on my lap. He was in the next car over. At a red light, I glanced sideways and met his eyes through the windshield. He lifted his hand in a slow wave. I didn't wave back. The church was packed with families just like ours, bundled in scarves and wool coats, cheeks red from the wind. I sat with my husband on my right, his hand resting absent-mindedly on my knee. I didn't feel it. My eyes kept flicking down the aisle. He sat alone near the back, flipping through the hymnal like he was reading poetry. Afterward, we all spilled out onto the icy sidewalk, people hugging and calling out holiday wishes. He brushed past me as we walked to the cars. His voice was low. "You okay?" I nodded. I didn't look at him. Back at the house, a plan formed. We needed a few things for dinner: brown sugar, green beans, extra napkins. My sister-in-law barked orders from the kitchen. I volunteered. Too quickly. Before I could reconsider, he stepped up behind me. "I'll go too," he said, grabbing the truck keys from the hook. The ride into town was short. The heater blasted, the road slick with refrozen slush. We didn't speak. The silence was louder than words. At the grocery store, the air was warm and stale. Christmas music played too loud through the speakers. We moved down the aisles like strangers. I grabbed things off the shelves, added them to the cart. He followed, close enough to feel. In the baking aisle, I stopped, searching for brown sugar. My hand hovered over the wrong bag. His voice was right behind me. "Not that one. Light brown, not dark." I turned. We were too close. Inches. His eyes didn't move from mine. Time folded inward. "You smell like cinnamon," he said. I dropped my gaze. "Don't." But he didn't step back. In the checkout line, he placed a small glass jar of cinnamon sticks on the belt. I looked at it, then at him. He didn't say a word. Back in the truck, the jar rolled gently on the dashboard with each turn. I didn't touch it. As we pulled into the driveway, I reached for the door handle too quickly and my coat sleeve caught on the latch. He reached across me instinctively to free it. We froze. I looked at him. He looked at me. We kissed. The sound of the front door slamming startled us apart. My nephew ran toward the truck, yelling something about needing help with firewood. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside my husband, his soft snore rhythmic, familiar. I turned to the wall. My chest burned. In the morning, the snow had stopped. I went to the garage to find the snow shovel. The light flickered overhead. He was there, crouched near a stack of firewood. He stood when he saw me. I opened my mouth to speak. He beat me to it. "This isn't a game," he said. "I know." He stepped closer, but I held up a hand. "We kissed," I said. "That's all." "That's not all," he replied. I turned and walked out. The afternoon dragged on in loud conversations and children fighting over board games. My husband watched football. I refilled glasses, smiled when necessary, and avoided mirrors. By sunset, the kitchen was chaos again. My sister-in-law sent us on another errand, ice and whipped cream. The same grocery store. He didn't come. I went with my cousin. When we got back, I saw him on the porch with my husband, both holding beers, laughing. The sight of them together made my stomach twist. I didn't go outside. Later that evening, the family gathered in the living room for charades. I declined and said I was tired. I climbed the stairs and sat in the dark bedroom, staring at my reflection in the window. Snowflakes floated against the glass like ghosts. Footsteps on the stairs. A pause at the door. Then nothing. I turned and saw an envelope slid halfway under the door. I picked it up, hands trembling. Inside wasn't a letter. It was the cinnamon jar. But it wasn't the same one. It was empty. And inside, a folded piece of paper. "If it was just a kiss, why do you keep holding your breath?" I stood there frozen, jar in hand. And then the floor creaked behind me. I spun around. The door was still closed. But the scent of cinnamon filled the room. I didn't open the door. I stood frozen in that bedroom, staring at the cinnamon jar in my hand, the faintest trace of warmth lingering in the air like he had been there moments before and slipped away into the walls. The house was too quiet. Downstairs, I could hear the muffled rumble of the fireplace and the low hum of conversations, but up here it felt as if time had curled in on itself. I slipped the jar back into the envelope and shoved it deep into the bottom of my suitcase, beneath folded sweaters and scarves. My hands trembled, not from guilt, at least, not entirely, but from the unmistakable feeling that something had already begun unraveling and I couldn't stop it now. We left the lake house that morning. My husband was upbeat, driving the first leg with coffee in hand, talking about some podcast he wanted to start. I nodded at the right times. My phone buzzed once in my bag, I didn't check. We were carpooling to the airport with his niece and nephew, and as luck, or cruelty, would have it, the only available arrangement meant he and I would ride up front, while the kids sat in the back. He didn't speak at first. I could feel the silence radiating off him like static. His hands stayed on the wheel, and I stared out the window at the trees passing in a blur of white and gray. Somewhere on Route 53, he finally glanced at me. "You look tired." I kept my gaze on the road ahead. "Didn't sleep much." His nod was slow, deliberate. "Me neither." At a gas station near Eau Claire, the kids jumped out to grab snacks. I stayed by the car, arms crossed against the wind. He joined me without a word, and we stood side by side, not touching, not speaking. "You kissed me," he said. I didn't look at him. "You kissed me." Same difference. The wind picked up, rattling the plastic sign above the fuel pump. I closed my eyes. "We shouldn't talk here," I muttered. "We don't talk anywhere." Back in the car, the silence stretched even tighter. At the airport, we all stood at the check-in kiosk together like some perfectly normal family unit. My husband wrapped an arm around my shoulder as we posed for a group photo. I smiled, because I had to. He stood a few steps back, hands in pockets, watching. Just before security, he reached into his coat and pressed something into my hand. A napkin. I glanced down. If you're still pretending, at least admit it to yourself. I crushed the napkin in my fist and dropped it into the nearest trash bin. The next week passed in fragments. At home, I re-entered the rhythm of laundry cycles, grocery lists, and early meetings. My husband worked late, often came home distracted, which suited me fine. Neither of us brought up the trip. At night, I dreamed of cold air and flickering porch lights. Of eyes watching me across crowded rooms. It was midweek when I found the second envelope, this one tucked neatly inside the mailbox, mixed in with catalogs and a utility bill. No name, just my address, written in a hand I knew too well. I opened it in the garage. Inside, a Polaroid. From the lake house. I recognized the wood-paneled hallway behind me. I had been laughing at something, mouth midword. He was in the background, unfocused, staring at me. The moment must have been snapped without me knowing. I didn't bring it inside. I shoved it into the trash, beneath coffee grounds and banana peels. The next morning, my husband made pancakes. He hummed. I watched him flip batter onto the griddle. He asked if I wanted to do something special next weekend. Maybe a hike. Just us. I said yes. But something in his smile looked like a test. Friday, the cinnamon jar showed up again. This time in the passenger seat of my car. I locked the doors. I left it there all day. That night, I went to the gym. Treadmill. 30 minutes. Then I walked past the weight area, needing to feel the noise of strangers, the clang of metal, anything but stillness. He was there. I stopped mid-step. He didn't look surprised. Didn't think you'd show, he said. I didn't come for you. I know. But I didn't leave. We talked. Not much. He told me he was leaving the state soon, starting a job in Boston. I said nothing. He looked relieved, like saying it out loud freed him. I asked when. End of next month. We walked to the parking lot together. He didn't ask me to follow him. I didn't offer. But I did. We kissed. After, I sat in my car, palms pressed to the steering wheel, not moving, engine off. My reflection in the dark windshield looked like someone else. When I finally came home, my husband was on the couch, laptop on his knees. He looked up and smiled. Made chili, he said. Yours is in the fridge. I nodded, dropped my bag by the door. I was thinking, he added, we should go to Boston sometime. You've always wanted to see it, right? I blinked. Boston? Yeah. He shrugged. Just an idea. I walked past him, toward the stairs. My heart was slamming against my ribs again. I paused on the third step, turned slowly. How long have you been planning that? His face didn't change. Does it matter? I stared at him for a long time. He didn't blink. And then he said, too calmly. I saw the way he looked at you. I couldn't breathe. But I kept climbing. Not fast. Not running. Step by step. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, tracing every crack in the plaster as if it held answers. My husband's breathing was steady beside me, unfazed. I kept replaying his words on the stairs like a broken tape loop. I saw the way he looked at you. He didn't accuse. He didn't confront. He observed, as if quietly waiting to see what I would do with it. By morning, he was already downstairs. I heard the coffee maker humming. The scent of maple bacon drifted up through the floor. I dressed slowly, as if that would somehow slow time down. But when I walked into the kitchen, everything was painfully normal. The eggs were plated, toast buttered, weather forecast murmuring in the background. He handed me a coffee. Flight's at 10. You packed? I nodded. We didn't speak much on the way to the airport. He talked about some article he read on productivity. I let the words pass over me like static. Our gate was crowded with business travelers in dark coats, tapping on laptops, murmuring into phones. I kept scanning the crowd, even though I knew he wouldn't be there. The flight to Boston was smooth, though I don't remember the takeoff. At some point, I looked out the window and saw nothing but clouds. My husband was reading. I turned away. We were in Boston for his company's leadership conference, 3 nights, 2 full days of panels and dinners. The hotel was sleek, glassy, perched on the harbor like a ship that had docked too long. By the first night, I was already restless. He had a welcome dinner with his team. I begged off, said I had a headache. He didn't press. I watched him leave through the lobby's revolving door, his black coat flaring behind him. That's when I saw him. Across the room, just beyond the concierge desk, standing with a clipboard, speaking with a hotel manager. He wore a navy blazer. His hair was shorter, neater. He looked older. And still the same. He didn't see me at first. I stepped backward, heart slamming into my ribs again. I wasn't ready. Not like this. But then he turned. We locked eyes. He blinked once. Then again. His mouth barely opened, just enough for a whisper I couldn't hear. I walked away. I didn't make it far. A few steps past the elevator, I felt his presence behind me. You're really here, he said quietly. I didn't turn. I shouldn't be. He paused. But you are. That night, I didn't leave my room. I sat on the edge of the bed with the curtains open, watching the city lights dance across the harbor. I didn't sleep. The next day, my husband was gone before dawn. Meetings. I spent the morning walking the waterfront, trying to forget what I had seen, who I had seen. But I kept seeing him anyway, in every stranger's face, in the reflections of cafe windows, in the shadows behind me. By early evening, I found myself back at the hotel bar. Dim lights. Soft jazz humming through the air. I ordered a glass of wine and sat in the corner booth, facing the entrance. He came in 20 minutes later. Alone. No blazer this time. Just a gray sweater and dark jeans. He scanned the room. Saw me. Walked over. Neither of us said hello. He sat down like he belonged there. I thought about you, he said. I took a sip of wine. Don't start. Too late. We talked. About nothing. About everything. About Boston. About cinnamon. About the lake house. At one point, I laughed. I don't remember why. It just happened. It felt strange and familiar all at once. He looked at me like he was memorizing my face. We walked. The cold air off the harbor cut through my coat. I didn't care. He kept his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. Back at the hotel, we stood in front of the elevator. The light blinked slowly above us. I have to go, I said. I know. The elevator arrived. I stepped in. Turned around. He didn't follow. But when the doors began to close, I reached out. They opened. He stepped in. We spent night together. In the morning, he was gone. No note. No message. Nothing. Just a folded newspaper on the nightstand and the cinnamon jar, now filled with small dried lavender stems. I stared at it for minutes, unable to breathe. It was the same jar. But something had shifted. I slipped it into my bag. I couldn't leave it behind. That afternoon, my husband and I walked through Boston Common. We bought coffee from a cart. He told me a story about his first trip here. I listened, nodded, smiled. I couldn't remember any of it later. At the airport, I moved like a ghost. Through security. Onto the plane. Into the seat beside him. Somewhere over Pennsylvania, I finally spoke. I saw him. My husband didn't react. He just stared out the window. I figured, he said. When we got home, the lights in the kitchen flickered for a moment before settling into a warm glow. I dropped my coat. He poured himself a scotch. I unpacked in silence. The cinnamon jar stayed buried at the bottom. 2 days later, a small package arrived on the front porch. No name. No return address. I opened it slowly, hands cold. Inside, a photograph. Us. On the harbor. From the night I laughed. From a distance. But not taken by me. And not taken by him. It had been taken by someone else. Someone watching. I didn't mention the photograph to anyone. I folded it carefully and buried it in the bottom of the same suitcase that had once held the cinnamon jar. My hands shook as I zipped it shut. I didn't know who had taken the photo, but something about the framing, the perfect focus, the exact timing, felt too deliberate to be random. Someone had seen us. Someone had been close. I spent the next few days pretending life had returned to normal. I made dinners. I cleaned the grout in the guest bathroom. I asked my husband about his day and nodded at his answers. He didn't bring up Boston again. We sat on opposite ends of the couch every night, lit by the glow of rerun sitcoms, saying almost nothing. I thought maybe the silence would settle into something permanent. Something that would muffle everything. But then came Sunday morning. He walked into the kitchen wearing a faded sweater and holding his phone. He was scrolling through something but not really reading it. Then, without looking up, he said, "You should go." I froze at the stove. Go where? He finally met my eyes. Somewhere. Anywhere. You've been elsewhere for weeks. Take a weekend. A week. Get your footing back. I waited for the other shoe to drop. It didn't. I'll book it, he added. Someplace quiet. You don't even have to think. He said it gently, like he was offering me permission to escape myself. And I took it. The brochure arrived the next day, Sea Pines Resort, Hilton Head Island. 3 nights. Full board. Yoga, ocean walks, no schedules. The kind of place you only see in magazines next to quotes about healing and renewal. He handed it to me in the hallway as he passed, as casually as if he were offering a grocery receipt. I packed light. 2 sweaters. 1 pair of sandals. The jar stayed behind. The flight was short. The drive from the airport even shorter. The sky looked different here, softer, the kind of blue that felt painted. I stepped into the resort lobby just before sunset. I barely recognized him. He was behind the check-in desk, wearing a white-collared shirt and a name tag. He looked up. And then looked again. He blinked once. You made it. I kept my expression flat. Apparently. There was a pause. Not hesitation, recognition. Cottage 12, he said, sliding the key across the counter. Far end. No neighbors. I took it and turned without another word. The walk to the cottage took longer than it should have. I kept glancing over my shoulder, unsure if I wanted to be followed or left alone. Inside, the room was clean and spare. Pale wood. Linen curtains. Salt in the air. I didn't unpack. The next morning, I walked the beach before sunrise. My feet sank into the cool sand, and gulls screamed somewhere overhead. The wind pushed at me gently, like it was trying to tell me something. When I turned around, he was there. 10 feet away. Not moving. You shouldn't have come, I said. He didn't argue. He didn't move closer. I'm not the one who booked it. Later, over coffee on the porch, we didn't speak much. There were other guests in sight, couples in fleece vests, retirees with wide-brimmed hats. No one paid us attention. We didn't touch. We didn't flirt. But every sentence hung in the air longer than it should have, every glance lasted too long. That evening, I attended a group dinner on the patio. Long wooden tables, lanterns hanging from the rafters. He wasn't there. I thought maybe he'd disappeared again, left me with ghosts and silence. But when I returned to the cottage, there was a folded note on my door. No handwriting. Just a printed slip. I draw near the dunes. If you want quiet, you'll find it there. I almost didn't go. But by then, resistance felt like theater. I walked slowly, down the path lit only by moonlight. The dunes rose like soft hills beside the beach, covered in tall grass that whispered with every gust of wind. He sat on a blanket, sketchbook in hand. I stopped 3 steps away. What are you doing? He didn't look up. Trying to remember how you looked the first time I saw you and knew. I didn't ask what he meant. He turned the page toward me. It wasn't finished. A rough outline of a woman looking out over water. She had my posture. My hands. But the face was left blank. I don't know how to draw someone who isn't sure who she is anymore, he said. The wind caught the edge of the paper and nearly lifted it away. He caught it in time. We didn't speak after that. We sat in silence until the stars came out. Back at the cottage, I tried to sleep. I couldn't. I lay in bed watching shadows stretch across the ceiling. Morning came too fast. I pulled the curtains back and stared at the horizon until the sun made it impossible to look. I dressed, walked to the main building for breakfast. That's when I saw her. She stood at the front desk, smiling, chatting with another staff member. Younger than me by 10 years. Golden hair. Soft laugh. She turned just enough for me to see the ring. She leaned across the counter and kissed him on the cheek. He smiled without hesitation. She laughed again and said, "Only 4 more days until I steal you permanently." He nodded. "You already have." I didn't breathe. She caught me staring. Walked right over. Held out her hand. "You must be the guest from cottage 12. He told me someone important was coming." I took her hand. Nodded. "I'm his fiancée," she said warmly. "I hope you're enjoying your stay." I smiled. Or something like it. That night, I left the jar on the porch railing and didn't look back. I didn't touch the jar again. I left it there, on the railing, exposed to the salt air, the insects, and the wind that rolled off the Atlantic like breath from something ancient and patient. That night, I locked the door behind me but didn't draw the curtains. I lay still for hours, letting the weight of the room press into me, letting the quiet stretch as far as it wanted to. By morning, the jar was gone. No note. No explanation. Just absence. And somehow, that was louder than anything he could have said. The day moved fast. Too fast. Morning yoga blurred into a group breakfast where everyone acted like they'd known each other for years. Laughter erupted every few minutes. I couldn't track conversations. I said "I-om-hom" to stories I wasn't following and nodded at jokes I didn't hear. The coffee was bitter. The sunlight too bright. By mid-afternoon, the island was in full resort motion. Golf carts zipped by in the distance, someone started grilling shrimp near the pool bar, and two teenage boys were arguing over who got the kayak next. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I walked. Away from the crowd, past the tennis courts, past the welcome center. Through a winding path lined with pines, palms, and the occasional placard about local wildlife. I wasn't sure where I was heading until I saw him. He was sitting cross-legged near a fire pit in a small circle of cottages that looked abandoned for the season. The ones they only opened when the island filled up. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked exhausted. "You shouldn't be out here," I said quietly. "I know. You're engaged." "I know that too." The silence between us wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was something colder. Resigned. I didn't sit. "I left the jar," I said. "I saw." "That wasn't for you. That was for me." He nodded, eyes on the fire pit's ashes. I figured. Someone called his name in the distance, feminine voice, playful tone. He flinched but didn't move. "She's looking for you," I said. He stood slowly, brushing sand off his jeans. "She always is." I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "Do you ever think," he asked, "that if we'd met in some other life, none of this would feel so wrong?" I didn't turn around. But we didn't. Later that evening, I saw them together on the main lawn. She wore a white linen sundress. He had his hand lightly at her lower back. They looked beautiful. As if someone had drawn them from a magazine page. She laughed at something he said, leaned in, and kissed his cheek. He kissed hers in return. Without hesitation. It should have hurt more than it did. At dinner, she sat beside me. Offered me a drink. Told me she loved my earrings. Said I reminded her of her aunt, elegant, composed, quiet. I smiled. I smiled a lot that night. He didn't look at me once. After dessert, someone suggested a group walk on the beach. I declined. Said I was tired. She looked disappointed. "Tomorrow, then," she said. "You'll come tomorrow?" I said yes. The next morning, I packed my things. Left the resort early. Told the desk I had an emergency. They didn't ask questions. They never do. Back home, the rhythm returned too easily. Unpacking. Laundry. Dinners reheated in the microwave. My husband commented on how rested I looked. He kissed my forehead and said, "You needed that." I didn't reply. Days passed. Then weeks. I stopped thinking about the island the way someone stops thinking about a place they never lived but once visited, warm, disconnected, unreal. Until I opened the mailbox. A small cream-colored envelope. My name written in tight, careful print. No return address. Postmarked from South Carolina. Inside was a photograph. Charcoal on cream. Hand-drawn. Me, standing on the dunes. Alone. Hair tangled by wind, eyes lost in the horizon. No signature. Just a note at the bottom, "You never turned around." It stayed on my nightstand for 2 days. Then I burned it in the fireplace. I thought that was the end. But I was wrong. 3 days later, I received a wedding invitation. Same handwriting. Their names embossed in gold. Their date, 2 weeks away. Venue, the island. My name printed clearly on the RSVP. Along with one word in the margin. Please. I stared at it until the room blurred. That evening, my husband poured wine. Asked what I'd like to do for our anniversary. I said I hadn't thought about it. He smiled. We'll figure it out. I excused myself and went upstairs. Sat on the edge of the bed. And whispered, "What the hell are you doing?" to no one. The RSVP card was still in my lap. I hadn't checked yes. But I hadn't thrown it out either. And I didn't know what that meant. I waited until midnight to RSVP. I didn't do it from my laptop or my phone. I took the card to the kitchen, stood under the harsh white light, and checked the box in pen, attending. No guest. No note. No explanation. I slid the card into the return envelope and drove it to the postbox downtown, as if getting it out of the house might stop it from infecting anything else. The streets were empty. The kind of emptiness that hums. On the way back, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and didn't recognize it. Not tired. Not scared. Just braced. The days leading up to the wedding unraveled like thread from a sweater. Every moment tugged loose the one before. I folded laundry with too much force. Scrubbed the kitchen floor twice in one day. I caught my husband watching me from the doorway more than once, his eyes not suspicious, just patient. 2 days before the wedding, I packed my bag. One dress. Simple. A pale blue that somehow didn't belong in any season. I didn't tell him where I was going. I left a note on the counter, a few days. Just for me. The flight was short. The landing smooth. I rented a car and drove the familiar stretch toward the resort, palms blurring past the windows like the pages of a book I already knew the ending to. The parking lot was full. More cars than I remembered. I saw family arriving, faces I hadn't seen since the lake house. People I wasn't related to by blood but had shared holidays and hand-me-down casseroles with. They nodded at me with polite smiles, warm enough to sting. The welcome dinner was already in motion when I stepped onto the lawn. White tents billowed in the breeze. Lanterns floated above tables. Music drifted softly from somewhere behind the hedge line. I found her first. She was radiant in the way only someone in love could be. Laughing, hugging people, holding a flute of champagne in one hand and a clipboard in the other. She wore white, of course, not a gown, just a sundress. Soft and simple, but it made her stand out in every photo. He was nearby. Laughing, too. Talking with her father. Clinking glasses. He looked comfortable in a way I never remembered him being. Like this had always been the plan. He noticed me only when I passed by the drink table. His face didn't change. No surprise. No panic. He excused himself from the group and caught up to me by the trellis. "You came," he said. I did. A pause. "You didn't have to." I know. We didn't speak again. Not that night. Not even as he watched me from across the lawn, his hand loosely clasped in hers, as if gripping her any tighter might make something crack. The next day was rehearsals, brunches, walks through the venue. I kept to the edge of every group, the quiet orbit around louder voices. I smiled when spoken to, accepted when offered food, and declined every invitation to sit closer. Late afternoon, I wandered alone toward the dunes. The sea was loud that day. The wind sharp. I wanted it to sting. I wanted something to feel as strong as what I couldn't name. That's when she found me. She appeared from behind, walking barefoot through the sand with a sweater draped over one arm. "I knew I'd find you out here," she said. I turned. She stood too close, but not with malice. Just warmth. "He said you were important to him. That you'd been part of his growth." "I don't know what that means exactly, but I'm glad you're here." I nodded, unsure how to form words. She sat beside me without asking. Dug her toes into the sand. "He's been different since he met me. But I think you were the one who made him ready for me." I said nothing. I couldn't. She smiled. "That probably sounds weird." I stared at the horizon. "No. It doesn't." We sat like that for what felt like hours. She told me about her job, her first date with him, how he'd once sent her a drawing of her hands after just 1 week of knowing her. I listened to every word and imagined them cutting me open. That evening, I didn't go to the group dinner. I stayed in the cottage, lights off, curtains drawn. I tried reading. I tried sleep. Neither stuck. A knock at the door. Quiet. Then louder. I opened it. It was him. He didn't step inside. "I needed to see you once," he said. I stood still. "I didn't ask you to come." "I know. I didn't think you'd say yes." "I didn't either. I'm not going to stop the wedding." "I didn't ask you to." He looked down, then back at me. "So why did you come?" I didn't answer. He reached into his pocket. Pulled out a folded piece of paper. No envelope. No note. Just a photo. It was me. In the dunes. From that first night on the island. Hair tangled, arms folded, mouth half open in surprise. Someone had captured it without me knowing. He didn't explain where it came from. I didn't ask. He handed it to me and turned to leave. At the door, I whispered, "You looked happy out there today." He didn't turn around. "That's because I was," he said. The morning of the wedding came too fast. The sun rose sharp. The air was thick with storm tension, but no rain came. Just heat and silence. Everyone gathered near the main lawn. Rows of chairs. A small white arch, flowers like fireworks. I stood in the last row. The music started. He appeared at the end of the aisle. Alone. Everyone turned. He didn't walk. He didn't move. The music played on. And on. Someone whispered. The officiant took a step forward. He looked up. "I'm sorry," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then he walked away. Straight past the chairs. Past the flowers. Past her. Past me. No one followed. I didn't breathe. The next hour passed in fragments. Whispers. Gasps. Questions. People tried to find him. They didn't. He was gone. And the last person who'd seen him was me. The ceremony never started. The chairs stayed in their neat little rows, white bows flapping against the breeze. Guests hovered near the aisle with half-finished glasses of champagne, speaking in hushed confusion or pacing with phones pressed to their ears. Some looked toward the path to the beach, as if expecting him to reappear from behind the dunes like a misplaced actor in a forgotten scene. But he didn't. I stood motionless. Not shocked. Not panicked. Just silent. She stood a few yards away from me, in her dress, motionless, mouth slightly open, fingers trembling around the bouquet that someone had already removed the ribbon from. Her eyes weren't red, not yet. She blinked slowly, not understanding. and when she turned and looked at me, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Eventually, someone ushered her away. A friend. Maybe a cousin. A few guests filtered toward their cars, murmuring apologies, offers to help, empty words that made more noise than comfort. I didn't move with them. I walked to the far end of the property. Past the arch, past the flower arrangements. Past the exact spot where he'd said I'm sorry. There were no signs of him. Inside the main house, voices bounced through the open hall. Someone was talking to the venue manager. Another was on the phone with local staff. The word missing started to repeat like background music. I stayed outside. By early afternoon, the sun dipped behind clouds. I stood by the railing near the bluff and stared at the stretch of sea and sky as if they owed me something. But they offered nothing. The mother of the bride passed behind me once. She didn't speak to me. Just stopped, then continued. I didn't look at her. It wasn't until hours later, when most of the guests had left and only the closest circle remained, that someone approached me directly. One of his uncles, I think. Heavy-set. Smelled of sunscreen and regret. He left his phone in his room, he said flatly. No bag. No wallet. I nodded. Do you know anything? He asked. I looked him in the eyes. No. He waited a moment longer, then walked away. Night came fast. The remaining guests stayed in tight groups. There was no laughter now. Just low voices and footsteps on gravel. A few people still wandered toward the beach with flashlights, calling his name like he might answer from the trees. I returned to my cottage. Turned the lock behind me. Sat on the bed without removing my shoes. He was gone. But I didn't believe for a second he was lost. And still, I barely slept. The next morning, there was no official word. No authorities, no helicopters, no headlines. Just absence. The kind of absence that gets heavier with every passing hour. By noon, I packed. I carried my small suitcase to the car in silence. The air felt different, thicker, unsettled, like something unspoken was pressing in on the island from all sides. Before I left, I walked down to the dock. Not to search. Not to think. Just to be still. That's where I found it. Tucked between two planks on the edge of the pier. Folded. Weather-worn. Almost missed. A postcard. On the front, a fishing village. Cold water. Seagulls perched on a crumbling wooden boat. Iceland. On the back, in block letters. Not lost. Just elsewhere. No name. No signature. Just that. I turned the card over again. The edges were wet. It had clearly been there overnight, touched by spray and wind and maybe hands that no longer wanted to explain themselves. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood there, holding it, feeling the weight of something end. Or begin. I wasn't sure which. I drove back to the airport in silence. Sat in the terminal surrounded by families and students and people with places to be. I had a place too. But it didn't feel real anymore. Back home, the lights were still on. My husband greeted me at the door with a calm face. Asked how the wedding was. I paused just long enough to feel the weight of the question. Unfinished, I said. He didn't ask more. He just nodded, took my bag, and walked into the kitchen. 2 days passed. Then 5. Then a week. And then, one evening, while loading the dishwasher, I found it. The jar. Back in the house. On the windowsill above the sink. filled this time with smooth black stones and a note inside. Just one word. Soon. And then, nothing.